Imagine this. You're sitting on a plane, excited for your trip. You're with your family, and everything seems perfect. The seats are comfy, the plane is nice, and the flight attendants are smiling. It's going to be a great trip. But suddenly, something happens that you never expected. Someone accuses you of doing something bad. And the person saying it? It's not a stranger or another passenger. It's someone who is supposed to help you. The flight attendant. Sounds crazy, right? But this is exactly what happened to Lisa and her family. They were just like any other family going on vacation. Happy and excited. But soon, their smiles turned into frowns. Their happy trip turned into a nightmare. And all because of one mistake. Or maybe, something even worse. Before we get into the full story, let me ask you, have you ever been blamed for something you didn't do? Maybe at school, at home, or even with friends? It feels really bad, doesn't it? Tell me in the comments if something like this has ever happened to you. Now, let's get back to Lisa's story. It all started when Lisa, her husband, and their 2 kids boarded the plane. They were ready for a fun vacation. They had their bags, their snacks, and even some books to read during the flight. The kids were excited to look out the window and watch the clouds. Lisa smiled as she found her seat and helped her kids settle in. Everything seemed fine. The plane was filling up with other passengers, and the flight attendants were busy walking around, helping people put their bags away and find their seats. One of the flight attendants, a woman named Karen, walked by and gave Lisa a quick smile. Lisa smiled back. She had no idea that this same flight attendant would soon turn their peaceful trip into a stressful one. After everyone sat down and the plane was almost ready to take off, something strange happened. Karen, the flight attendant, walked up to Lisa's family with a serious look on her face. She didn't look friendly anymore. Instead, she looked upset. "Excuse me," Karen said, pointing at Lisa's son. "I believe you took something that doesn't belong to you." Lisa was confused. "I'm sorry. What do you mean?" she asked kindly. Karen crossed her arms and said, "Your son took a pair of headphones from the cart. They are not his. We saw him take them." Lisa's heart started to race. Her son, who was only 10 years old, looked up in shock. "I didn't take anything," he said, his eyes wide with fear. Lisa's husband spoke up. "We brought our own headphones. We don't need to take anything." But Karen wasn't listening. She shook her head. "I saw him take them," she said again, this time louder. People sitting nearby started looking at them. Lisa could feel their eyes watching and whispering. She felt so embarrassed. How could they think her son was a thief? Lisa tried to stay calm. "Maybe there's been a mistake," she said. "Can we check our bags? We only have our own things." Karen didn't seem to care. She was sure that Lisa's son took the headphones. Lisa felt helpless. She knew her son didn't steal anything. But how could she prove it? As more passengers started to watch, Lisa felt like crying. Her son looked like he wanted to disappear. Lisa held his hand and whispered, "It's okay. We'll figure this out." But inside, she was worried. What if no one believed them? What if they got kicked off the plane? The plane was getting ready to leave, and Lisa just wanted everything to go back to normal. But Karen stood there, waiting for them to admit to something they didn't do. Lisa opened their bag and showed their own headphones. "See? These are ours," she said, holding them up. But Karen shook her head. "No. The ones you took were from the airplane," she insisted. Lisa looked around, hoping someone would help, but no one said anything. Some people were staring, and others were pretending not to notice. The feeling of being accused was terrible. Lisa could see her son's eyes filling with tears, and that made her even more upset. Just when Lisa thought things couldn't get worse, something unexpected happened. A man sitting behind them stood up and said, "I saw what happened. They didn't take anything." Lisa looked at him with hope. The man held up his phone and said, "I was recording when the flight attendant came by earlier. I think you should take a look." Karen's face changed. She suddenly looked nervous. Lisa felt a spark of hope. Maybe now they could prove their innocence. The man handed his phone to Lisa. And when she watched the video, she couldn't believe it. The video showed Karen putting the headphones into a small cabinet near the seats before Lisa and her family even boarded the plane. Lisa felt relief and anger at the same time. Karen had made a mistake. Or maybe she had done it on purpose. Lisa took a deep breath and turned to Karen. "I think you should take a look at this," she said, handing her the phone. Karen's face turned red. She watched the video and didn't know what to say. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Some of the passengers nearby started whispering, and Lisa could see a few of them nodding in agreement. Finally, Karen sighed and said, "I'm sorry. I must have been mistaken." But Lisa knew it wasn't just a simple mistake. Karen had accused them without thinking, and it had almost ruined their trip. The captain of the plane soon arrived after hearing about the situation. He looked at Karen and said, "We take things like this very seriously. I think you should step off the plane and speak to the security team." Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. The flight attendant was being asked to leave the plane. The other passengers clapped quietly, and Lisa felt a wave of relief. As Karen walked off the plane, Lisa hugged her son and said, "See? We knew the truth, and that's what matters." Her son smiled, wiping away his tears. "Thanks, Mom," he said. Lisa looked around and thanked the kind man who helped them. Without him, they might not have been able to prove their innocence. Finally, the plane took off, and Lisa and her family were able to enjoy their trip. But they learned an important lesson that day. Sometimes, people will accuse you of things you didn't do, but the truth will always come out. And that's the story of how one family's simple trip turned into something they'd never forget. So, what do you think? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Let me know in the comments below. It all started on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Lisa and her two kids, Jake and Emma, were very excited for their family trip. They had been planning it for months. And today was finally the day. The airport was busy, with people rushing around, pulling their suitcases, and talking loudly. Lisa held onto Emma's hand while Jake walked beside her, looking around with wide eyes. After checking their bags and going through security, they made their way to the gate. "Are we really going to fly in that big plane, Mom?" Emma asked, pointing at the airplane outside the window. Lisa smiled. "Yes, sweetie. It's going to be so much fun." Jake grinned and said, "I can't wait to watch the clouds from up there." Quote, soon, it was time to board the plane. Lisa helped the kids find their seats. They sat down, buckled their seatbelts, and looked around excitedly. The plane was full of people, some reading, some talking, and some looking at their phones. Everything seemed normal, and Lisa felt happy. This was going to be a great trip. As the passengers settled in, a flight attendant named Karen walked down the aisle. She was dressed in a neat uniform and had a big smile on her face. "Hello, everyone," she said cheerfully. "Welcome aboard. We hope you have a great flight." Lisa smiled at her, feeling good about the friendly welcome. But things soon took a strange turn. After a while, Karen walked past again, this time with a different look on her face. She wasn't smiling anymore. Instead, she looked serious, even a little angry. She stopped right in front of Lisa and her kids. Lisa looked up, feeling confused. "Excuse me, ma'am," Karen said, her voice firm. "I believe your son took something from our cart." Lisa blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry. What do you mean?" she asked politely. Karen crossed her arms and said, "Your son took a pair of our airplane headphones. They are not his, and we need them back." Lisa's heart started to race. Jake? She turned to her son. Jake looked confused and scared. I didn't take anything, Mom. I promise, he said, his eyes wide with fear. Lisa's face grew hot with embarrassment. People were starting to look. Some passengers whispered to each other, while others just stared. Lisa felt like all eyes were on them. She could feel her cheeks turning red. I'm sure this is a mistake, Lisa said, trying to stay calm. We brought our own headphones. Maybe someone else took them? Quote. Karen shook her head. I saw him take them, she insisted. Her voice was louder now, and Lisa felt even more nervous. Emma squeezed Lisa's hand tightly. Feeling scared, Lisa took a deep breath and opened their small travel bag. She pulled out a pair of headphones. Look, these are ours, she said, showing them to Karen. We packed them before we left home. Karen frowned and leaned closer. No, those aren't the ones I'm talking about, she said sharply. The ones he took are from our cart. Jake looked like he wanted to cry. Mom, I didn't do anything, he whispered. Lisa believed him, but Karen didn't seem to. Lisa felt stuck. What could she do? Other passengers were staring now. Some were shaking their heads, and Lisa could hear a few of them whispering. Did you see that kid take something? One person asked quietly. I don't know, but they sure look guilty, another replied. Lisa's stomach felt tight. She hated feeling like this. Like she was doing something wrong when she wasn't. Is there a way to check? Lisa asked Karen, trying to stay calm. We didn't take anything, I promise. Karen crossed her arms again. We don't need to check, she said coldly. We saw it happen. Lisa felt helpless. How could she prove they didn't do it? She knew her son, and she knew he wouldn't steal anything. But what could she say to make Karen believe them? A man sitting across the aisle cleared his throat. Excuse me, he said. I've been sitting here the whole time. I didn't see the boy take anything. Lisa looked at him gratefully. Thank you, she said softly. But Karen still didn't look convinced. Sir, we appreciate your input, but we have our own rules, she said. She looked back at Lisa. If we don't get the headphones back, we'll have to report this. Lisa's heart sank. Report it? What did that mean? Would they get in trouble? Would they be asked to leave the plane? Jake looked down at his lap, his face red with shame even though he had done nothing wrong. Lisa felt angry. She wanted to protect her kids, but she also didn't want to make things worse. Lisa looked around the plane. Some people looked away quickly, pretending not to listen. Others kept staring. She could feel the tension in the air. Her hands felt shaky, but she stayed strong for her kids. Please, she said to Karen, her voice steady but firm. We did not take anything. We're just here to enjoy our trip. Karen sighed and looked at them again, as if trying to decide what to do. Finally, she said, I'll check with the other flight attendants. And with that, she walked away, leaving Lisa and her family feeling embarrassed and upset. Lisa turned to Jake and Emma. It's okay, she whispered. We know the truth. Don't worry. Jake nodded, but Lisa could tell he still felt sad. Emma leaned against Lisa and said, Mom, I don't like this. Lisa hugged her daughter and whispered, Me neither. Sweetie. The plane was quiet now, but Lisa could feel the weight of what had just happened. Even though they hadn't done anything wrong, they were still being looked at as if they had. It was a terrible feeling. Lisa sat back in her seat and took a deep breath. She hoped this would all be over soon. She just wanted to enjoy the trip with her family. But deep down, she couldn't stop thinking, what if Karen didn't believe them? What if this got even worse? The air inside the plane felt heavy. Lisa could hear her own heartbeat as she tried to stay calm. She looked at Karen, the flight attendant, and said again, Please, we didn't take anything. These are our own headphones. We brought them from home. Jake, her son, held onto Lisa's arm tightly. His eyes were big and filled with fear. Mom, I didn't do it, he whispered. Lisa hugged him and whispered back, I know, sweetie, I believe you. But Karen didn't look convinced. She crossed her arms and frowned. Ma'am, I know what I saw, she said, her voice firm. If you just give them back now, we won't have any trouble. Lisa felt trapped. She didn't want to argue, but she also didn't want to be blamed for something they didn't do. The other passengers were watching closely now. Some were whispering, and Lisa could hear bits of their conversations. Do you think they really took it? A woman whispered to her husband. I don't know, he replied, but they look pretty nervous. Lisa felt her face grow hot. She didn't like people looking at her family this way. She just wanted this whole thing to be over. Suddenly, a man sitting across the aisle pulled out his phone. He was wearing glasses and had a serious look on his face. I don't think this is right, he said to the person next to him. I'm going to record this. He held up his phone and started filming. Lisa saw the red light blinking. And for the first time since this started, she felt a little bit of hope. Maybe now, people would see they weren't lying. Karen noticed the man recording, and her face changed for a moment. She seemed nervous, but then she quickly smiled and said in a sweet but fake voice, Sir, you don't need to record. We are just handling a small issue. But the man didn't stop. I think it's important to make sure everything is fair, he said. Lisa felt thankful for the stranger's help, but Karen didn't look happy. She cleared her throat and said louder, Let's not make this bigger than it is. Just return the headphones, and we can move on. Lisa shook her head and spoke firmly. We did not take anything. Can you check the card again? Maybe they were misplaced. Karen sighed and rolled her eyes. That won't be necessary. I know they're missing. But as Lisa watched Karen closely, she noticed something strange. Karen kept glancing toward a small compartment near the seats. It was a tiny storage space where flight attendants sometimes kept small things. Lisa narrowed her eyes. Why did Karen keep looking there? Was something inside? Lisa felt a little bit of hope in her chest. Maybe the headphones were there. Maybe Karen made a mistake and didn't want to admit it. Lisa decided to speak up. Can we check inside that compartment? She asked, pointing to it. Karen's face turned pale for just a second. Then, she quickly smiled and shook her head. There's nothing in there that belongs to you, she said quickly. But Lisa could tell something was off. Karen looked nervous now. Emma, Lisa's younger daughter, tugged on her sleeve and whispered, Mom, why does she keep looking over there? Quote, I don't know, honey, Lisa whispered back. But I think something isn't right. Jake, still sitting quietly, looked at Karen and then at the compartment. Mom, maybe the headphones are in there, he said softly. Karen's voice grew louder. Please, let's not make a scene. The headphones are missing, and I just need them back. Lisa took a deep breath. She wasn't the kind of person to argue, but she knew she had to stand up for her family. Karen, she said firmly, I really think you should check inside that compartment. If they're not there, then we can talk. More passengers were watching now. Some were nodding in agreement. Yeah, let her check, a voice from the back called out. Karen looked uncomfortable. She glanced at the other flight attendants, who were now watching too. One of them, an older woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. Karen, she said softly, maybe it's worth checking, just to be sure. Karen's lips tightened, but she nodded. Fine, she said sharply. She walked over to the compartment, opened it quickly, and there they were, the missing headphones, sitting right inside. A gasp went through the cabin. Lisa felt relief wash over her, but she also felt angry. Karen had been so sure they took them. But they were right there all along. Karen's face turned red, and she stumbled for words. Oh, I must have put them there earlier, she said, avoiding Lisa's eyes. The man recording the scene spoke up. So they didn't take them after all, he said. Lisa looked at her kids and smiled. See? I told you, she whispered, squeezing their hands. Karen cleared her throat and forced a smile. I apologize for the confusion, she said. But Lisa could tell she wasn't really sorry. Some of the passengers clapped softly. And Lisa felt proud of herself for staying calm. She turned to Jake and Emma. You did great, she said. We knew the truth. And the truth always comes out. Jake nodded, feeling braver now. I didn't steal, he said with a small smile. Lisa looked at Karen and said politely, next time, please make sure before accusing someone. Karen nodded, but she still looked embarrassed. She quickly walked away to avoid more questions. The tension in the plane started to fade. People went back to reading their books and looking at their phones. The kind flight attendant who helped smiled at Lisa and said, enjoy your flight. Lisa sighed with relief and leaned back in her seat. That was scary, Emma said. Lisa hugged her. Yes. But we're okay now. Jake smiled and said, I'm glad that man recorded everything. Lisa nodded. Me too. Sometimes. We need help from others when things aren't fair. As the plane finally started to take off, Lisa felt grateful. She was proud of her kids for staying strong. And she was happy that they could finally enjoy their trip. But she also learned something important. Sometimes, you have to stand up for the truth. Even when it's hard. Lisa sat in her seat, feeling helpless. She had tried everything. Explaining, showing their own headphones, and even asking Karen to check again. But nothing worked. Karen, the flight attendant, still believed that Lisa's son, Jake, had stolen the missing headphones. Lisa felt a lump in her throat. This was not fair. She knew her son would never steal. But no one seemed to believe them. Jake sat quietly next to her, his face sad. He looked down at his hands and whispered, Mom, I really didn't take them. Lisa squeezed his hand gently and said, I know, sweetheart. I believe you. But deep inside, Lisa didn't know what else to do. Just when she was about to give up and accept the blame, a voice from the back of the plane spoke up. Excuse me, the voice said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Lisa turned around quickly. It was the man who had been filming earlier. He stood up and held up his phone high in the air. I think everyone should see this, he said firmly. People on the plane looked toward him with curiosity. Karen, the flight attendant, stiffened. Lisa could see her eyes widen. And she looked nervous. The man pressed a button on his phone. And the video started playing. The screen showed something shocking. Something Lisa had never expected. There, on the screen, was Karen. The video showed her earlier. Before Lisa and her family had even gotten on the plane. Karen was standing near the cart, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Then, slowly, she slipped the headphones into a small compartment near the seats and walked away as if nothing happened. A loud gasp spread through the plane. People leaned closer to see the video better. Some covered their mouths in surprise, while others shook their heads in disbelief. Lisa's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Karen had been wrong all along. The headphones were never stolen. They were hidden in the compartment the entire time. Karen's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She looked at the other flight attendants, hoping someone would help her, but they just stared in shock too. One passenger said, "Oh my gosh. She was lying this whole time?" Quote. Another added, "Poor kid. He didn't do anything wrong." Lisa felt tears of relief fill her eyes. Finally, the truth was out. She looked at Jake and Emma and said softly, "See? I told you we did nothing wrong." Jake sat up straighter, his eyes full of surprise and relief. "Mom, they know now." he said with a small smile. Karen tried to regain control of the situation. There must be some mistake, she said, her voice shaky. This video isn't. It's not what it looks like. But the man with the phone shook his head. I recorded the whole thing. This video shows exactly what happened. Passengers around Lisa started whispering louder. This is so unfair, a woman said. They should apologize. Quote, yes. They embarrassed that poor family for no reason, another person added. Karen took a step back, her face red with embarrassment. I didn't mean to accuse anyone, she mumbled. The head flight attendant, an older woman with kind eyes, stepped forward. She took one look at the video and then turned to Karen with a disappointed look. Karen, we need to talk. Right now, she said firmly. Lisa couldn't believe what was happening. After all the stress and worry, justice was finally being served. She felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The head flight attendant turned to Lisa and her family. Ma'am, I am so sorry for this mistake, she said kindly. We deeply apologize for any trouble caused. Lisa nodded but didn't say anything yet. She was still processing everything. The passengers began to clap, showing their support for Lisa and her family. A woman across the aisle smiled at Jake and said, "You were very brave, young man." Jake grinned a little, feeling proud of himself. Lisa smiled too, feeling grateful for the people who stood up for them. Karen, realizing there was no way out, looked down and quietly walked toward the front of the plane. The head flight attendant followed her, and a few minutes later, an announcement came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the earlier confusion. Thank you for your patience. We will now continue with our flight. Lisa sighed in relief and leaned back in her seat. She looked at the man who had recorded the video and said, "Thank you so much. I don't know what we would have done without you." He smiled and said, "I just did what was right." Emma looked at her mom and said, "Mom, I was scared, but I'm happy now." Lisa kissed her forehead and replied, "Me too, sweetheart." As the plane finally started to move again, Lisa realized something important. Even when things seem unfair, the truth always finds a way to come out. She looked at Jake and Emma and said, "See? We just have to stay strong and believe in the truth." Jake nodded. "Yeah, and sometimes nice people help too." Lisa smiled. "That's right. There are always people who will stand up for what's right." The rest of the flight went smoothly. The flight attendants were extra nice to Lisa's family, offering them snacks and drinks as a way to apologize. Lisa appreciated it, but she knew nothing could erase how embarrassed they had felt earlier. As they landed, Lisa held her kids' hands and whispered, "We made it, and we're stronger because of it." Jake smiled, and Emma hugged her mom tightly. "I love you, Mom." Lisa smiled back and said, "I love you too." And with that, they stepped off the plane, ready to enjoy their vacation. But they would never forget this flight. A flight that taught them the power of truth and standing up for themselves. The plane was buzzing with whispers and murmurs. The video of Karen hiding the headphones had spread like wildfire among the passengers. People passed phones around, watching the shocking truth unfold again and again. Lisa sat in her seat, holding Jake's hand tightly. She could finally breathe, knowing they were no longer blamed for something they didn't do. Within minutes, the flight crew called the captain to the scene. A tall man in a crisp uniform appeared from the cockpit, his face serious. He walked toward Karen, who stood nervously near the front of the plane. Her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept glancing at Lisa and the passengers, hoping for a way out. The captain spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Karen, can you explain what's going on here?" he asked. Karen opened her mouth, trying to defend herself. "Captain, I was just trying to do my job. I thought I saw something suspicious," she stammered, her voice shaky. The captain looked at the phone one of the passengers handed him. He watched the video carefully, his face showing no emotion. The whole plane was silent, waiting for his response. After a few moments, he looked up at Karen with a disappointed expression. "This is very serious," he said. "You accused an innocent family. And now, we have proof that the headphones were never stolen." Lisa felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone in charge understood what had happened. Karen's face turned pale. "I didn't mean any harm," she said quickly. "It was just a misunderstanding." The captain shook his head. "A misunderstanding? You embarrassed this family in front of everyone. You didn't check properly before accusing them," he said firmly. The head flight attendant stepped forward. "Captain, I believe Karen should step off the plane. This situation has caused too much trouble for the passengers." Karen's eyes widened. "Please, I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. But the decision was made. Two security officers appeared at the front of the plane. They walked toward Karen and stood beside her. One of them spoke gently but firmly. "Ma'am, please come with us." Karen's face crumbled. Tears welled up in her eyes. And she looked around. But no one came to her defense. The same passengers who once trusted her were now shaking their heads, whispering about how unfair she had been to Lisa and her kids. She turned to Lisa and muttered, "I'm sorry." Lisa, still feeling the sting of embarrassment from earlier, nodded but didn't say anything. She wasn't angry anymore, just relieved that the truth was finally out. As Karen slowly walked down the aisle, escorted by security, the passengers clapped softly. Some whispered words like, "Justice," and, finally, Karen kept her head down, her career now hanging by a thread. Once Karen was off the plane, the captain turned to Lisa and her kids. "On behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for what happened today," he said kindly. "You should never have been treated this way." Lisa smiled softly and nodded. "Thank you. We just want to enjoy our trip now." The captain gave her a reassuring nod. "We'll make sure of that." One by one, other flight attendants came by to apologize. They offered snacks, drinks, and extra pillows to Lisa's family, trying to make up for what had happened. Passengers who had doubted them before also began to apologize. A woman sitting across the aisle leaned over and said, "I'm really sorry for judging you earlier. I should have waited for the truth." Lisa smiled and said, "It's okay. Sometimes things aren't what they seem." An older man a few rows behind Lisa spoke up. "I've learned an important lesson today. We shouldn't be so quick to believe everything we hear." Jake, who had been quiet for a while, looked at Lisa and said, "Mom, does this mean we won?" Quote, Lisa smiled and hugged him. "Yes, Jake, we won because we told the truth and stayed strong." Emma, Lisa's younger daughter, grinned and said, "Mom, can we get some cookies now?" Quote, everyone around laughed softly, and the tension that had filled the plane before was now gone. The plane felt peaceful again. As the flight continued, the kind flight attendant who had helped earlier stopped by. She handed Lisa a special voucher and said, "The airline would like to offer you this for your trouble. It's a free round-trip ticket for your family." Lisa was surprised. "Wow, thank you so much." The flight attendant smiled. "It's the least we can do after what happened." Lisa felt grateful, knowing that even though the situation had been stressful, things were finally looking up. She looked at her kids, happy that they could finally relax and enjoy the flight. A few hours later, as the plane prepared to land, Lisa looked out the window and watched the clouds pass by. She thought about everything that had happened and realized something important. Standing up for the truth is never easy, but it's always worth it. As the plane touched down, the passengers started clapping again. Lisa held her kids' hands and whispered, "We made it." Jake smiled and said, "Mom, I think this will be our best vacation ever. Quote, Lisa laughed. I think so too, buddy. When they got off the plane, the staff at the gate greeted them with smiles and apologies. Lisa accepted them graciously, but she was just happy to finally move on. As they walked toward the baggage claim, Emma looked up and asked, Mom, will we ever see Karen again? Quote, Lisa thought for a moment and said, maybe, but I hope she learned something today. Jake added, yeah, maybe next time. She'll think before blaming someone. Lisa smiled and nodded, I hope so. And with that, they walked out of the airport, ready to enjoy their trip with a new sense of confidence and strength. They had faced a challenge, but they had stood together as a family. And in the end, justice had been served.